Hey folks, welcome to another exciting episode of Long Shots. This is Nikhil Arora. I have with me Mr. Sharad Chupran. Hey Sharad, how's it going, man?
It's going good, and I think some of the lockdown related logistics are becoming easier now. So I guess we're slowly drifting into positive territory. But thanks to our listeners for stopping back.
Yeah, I mean, considering I don't know, it's a W-shaped curve or like a W-shaped curve in repeated series. So I'm guessing we are going to kind of flip flop between the intensity of things. Wasn't it only I think yesterday where Oppo opened a factory in Delhi, close to Delhi, and a few guys got infected, so they shut it down again. So I think that you're going to see that a lot. But on a positive note, we have a very exciting guest with us, Sharad. We have with us Professor Madhu Vishwanathan. He's Assistant Professor of Marketing at Indian School of Business, Hyderabad. He was previously an Assistant Professor at the University of Arizona. He has done a fair bit of work on B2B relationships, strategies, pricing models, distribution channels. Clearly a marketing and strategy person, so it's very, very exciting. And we're truly honored to have with us. So, hey, Madhu, how's it going, man? Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, guys. Glad to be on the show. Looking forward to chatting with you guys, especially during these times.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. And it's always a pleasure when someone from the world of business, either academic or industry, stops by because the conversation generally is right in Nikhil and my wheelhouse. So we tend to enjoy it a lot more. But looking forward to it. And I guess, Madhu, when I look at your profile, the first thing that jumps out is sort of your move. I think you went to BITS Pilani and then you sort of got your PhD as well from Minnesota and then worked in Arizona, then moved back. So how did that come up? Did you always know that you wanted to be in the academic setup of things, or how did that unfold?
So it's funny you ask. I think I'm not sure about Shashwat, the guest you had previously, but I think a lot of academics, especially in the business school, land there by accident. So, for example, when I was in BITS, I had no clue that there was a PhD in business administration or a PhD in marketing.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a computational fluid dynamics guy. So I did mechanical engineering in BITS, and I like math, I like a little bit of problem solving, and linear algebra and everything seemed interesting to me. And so I thought I will end up in computational fluid dynamics, a little bit of differentiation and calculus thrown in. So I did, it sounded like fun. And unfortunately, I graduated in the 2001-2002 recession. And so at that time, I had applied to the US, but the schools had rescinded, the jobs were rescinded, of course.
Yeah.
And then after that, of course, a lot of the schools took away their grant money, right? So you were not getting as much funding at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I basically had to, not go because I just didn't have the funds to take me there. And so I basically spent a year at NAL, the National Aerospace Laboratories in Bangalore. 6 months was part of the BITS program, and then I spent an additional 6 months because they wanted us there. And I thought it was a good option, but man, now it does not pay at all, or at least didn't pay at that time.
Yeah.
So at my internship, I think I got 1,000 rupees as a stipend every month.
Yeah.
So they provided accommodation, for which they took 600 rupees. And then they provided lunch and breakfast, so they took 399. So I was left with 1 rupee at the end of the day.
That's funny.
So it was interesting. But, it's still a government-run organization, right? So from the accounting perspective, I was getting a salary.
Yeah. So maybe when you were paying $3.99 for lunch, maybe that's when you thought, okay, so pricing, I need to understand pricing right now.
Yeah. No, but the lunch was good, in that regard. I didn't mind paying it for that.
Yeah.
So, I then took up a job in a personal situation has changed, and I had to move back to Chennai. And so I took up a job at a very interesting company called Blue Chip Amusements. And so they used to actually manufacture simulation theaters for amusement parks.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so a lot of it was just reverse engineering, imitating what was done outside the US, but it was, for a engineer fresh aboard, it was a lot of fun because, you looked at the designs from outside the US and then you tried to figure out how to create the robots, per se, right? The mechanical engineer, the mechanical systems, and then integrate them with, audio, video, and then even the fluid dynamic system. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But again, an engineering company, they hardly paid me anything. So I used to moonlight as one of those CAD/GRE GMAT instructors.
Okay.
Wow.
And so, that paid almost double of what I did for 1/4 the amount of time I spent there.
The ROI was there, yeah.
yeah. So I was making good money then. I thought I could make this a profession. But, attitudes at that time were not towards these kind of coaching centers. And, my parents were strongly against me taking up a career just coaching. Little did they know at that time, right?
Yeah.
And so what they did is they forced me to take up a proper job, which in those days meant a software job. So my first so-called proper job was actually at Infosys Hyderabad, right opposite the ISB campus.
Yeah.
And, it was okay for a while, but I grew bored very fast.
Yeah.
6 months, it was a maintenance job, unfortunately. I landed in one of those teams. The job was fun for some time, but after a while, it got a little boring. And I was frustrated with the lack of opportunities. And so I just went to my manager, asked him if there was, a promotion or some other thing that could, take advantage of my abilities. There's always a little bit of ego in there. And of course, the manager said, you'll have to wait your turn. And so I just called up one of my college friends who had just gone to the US and said, dude, help me out. I'm bored here and frustrated and everything. And he said, why don't you come do a PhD with me? I'm doing a PhD in business administration and marketing.
Yeah.
And so just come over, it will be fun. I thought, okay, college days were of course the best days of our lives in some ways.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fun involved. And so I thought, okay, this would be great. Little did I know.
But I mean, it's interesting because there are a lot of, I would say, the foundational work was already being laid out, right? In the sense that, a lot of people actually use an MBA as, why am I saying a lot of people? I think I myself used an MBA pretty much as, a good way to start from scratch, right? You kind of took it one level up. You thought, okay, let me do a PhD in business.
So the PhD was partly because my friend was already there, and partly because it was, the funding was there. Okay, so this is the thing about PhD in business, and a lot of people don't know it, is there's a huge glut for PhDs in the business administration. And so, jobs are more or less guaranteed, and schools are looking to meet their supply.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So you will find most schools will pay for the entire 5 years and maybe even sweeten the pot a little bit by giving you more than what other PhD students are getting.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
I
guess there's a supply side challenge, right, from the perspective of faculty.
Correct. And so that's the thing, right? So once you find it, right, it's very good for the people who realize that this is a good area to be in. And so at that time, of course now it has become more competitive because more people have found it.
Right.
So the kind of PhD students we get now are definitely not as clueless as I was.
But I like the fact, Madhu, that a lot of your decision making had a chase for better compensation and financial incentives, which drove you to the path, and I'm glad that was a key decision maker.
Right. I think it was not as explicit as that.
Yeah.
Definitely towards about making my life better.
Yeah. No, it makes sense, and I appreciate that background. And also, I think you've now started blogging as well, or has it been a while? And I think you've touched a lot on your core strengths and sort of data security and marketing. Kind of, you use some of your training and education and experience towards blogging as well, right?
Right. So the blogging is a very new thing, and some of it is just selfish. second part is more to, let others know for a lot of the scientific research work that happens in the business area. There are lots of cool findings that go on, and most people find it difficult to read papers.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I could serve as a medium to bridge that gap. It may not be for a lay person, but somebody who can understand things like when I lay out the trade-offs. So somebody who's either gone to an MBA school or has done a master, right? They'll be able to understand some of the things I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I want to point out, it's not as clear-cut as what the discussions are in papers, right? So there are lots of things that get hidden.
No, we understand that completely, and I think we'll be immediately in agreement with you. I mean, running a content company, Nikhil and I sort of focus a lot on sort of the key themes in content and how explainer style and analysis and opinions, and we read a bunch of stuff. And there's just such an oversupply of content, right? I mean, it's just flow of information is no longer a challenge. It's just so much of content, and people are trying to, segregate and create their own little niche and pockets of expertise. It's a fascinating time for content, right?
Right. And what do you think about the fact that there is a lot of similarity in content also, right? Especially among the top media houses, you find people converging to similar topics of conversation.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely there, and classically it leads to echo chambers, right, when everyone's saying the same thing, and this gets accentuated in an opinion setup, but that's the challenge, right, on how you differentiate when there's so much of overlap in types of content, and even in content, right, I mean, you can look at so many different, through so many different lenses, from mainstream news and reportage to actual analysis and opinion to data mining to, and the mediums itself vary from microblogging site like Twitter to actual deep dive opinion pieces in mainstream newspapers, and companies like us as well, right? We have a pocket, we focus on finance and business, and we sort of do a lot of analysis work. It is a challenge, but you got to add some layered insight or add something unique which will differentiate from a quality standpoint or from a unique insight standpoint, right? I mean, that's the biggest challenge, right?
Right, yeah. No, especially in content nowadays, right? There are so many choices, like you said. And you need to figure out how to stand out and then how to monetize your content as well, right?
Yeah.
So those are the big challenges for today, right? Yeah, I got a viral video out there, but what did you really gain?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And that's a brand building exercise, right? That takes a lot of time, and I think even content models as such are typically back end loaded. I think you make most of your money in the second half, let's call it. The first half is just investment back, right? And it's interesting that you talk about pricing. I mean, that's something Nikhil and I obviously closely watch as well, and ranging from these OTT providers as Netflix, Amazon Prime as one sort of content, and then actual mainstream news where they're struggling to decide between ads and subscription. Like, what is your general view on this entire ecosystem? I mean, there's a big ads versus subscription dilemma that a lot of people talk about. Then even on the sort of video OTT guys, right? Like, I mean, you have someone like a Hotstar, which is some of it is ad supported, some of it is paywalled. Then you have guys like Netflix, which is pure play subscription. And the same thing with news, right? I mean, there are some like an Economist or a Wall Street Journal. I mean, they're completely paywalled, but on the other hand, there'll be some ad supported newspapers as well. How do you see that, this dichotomy as such at play? Like, where do you think the industry is moving? Like, do you think both will coexist, or do you think in the long run, for better monetization, it has to be one way or the other?
So I don't think it will be one way for or the other. I think they always adapt to situations, right? And I think the problem is actually identifying what the problem is, right? I don't think it is advertisements versus subscription. I think the biggest knock to media, especially print, has been the loss of classifieds.
Okay.
Okay, and think about your standard setup, right? Before, I remember marriage ads, right?
Yeah.
Were a big thing in newspapers. Groom wanted, bride wanted. Nowadays, nobody goes to the newspapers for these things.
Jobs as well, yeah? Jobs.
Yeah, even jobs, right? Yeah, exactly. Classifieds, all kinds of those things, right? they go to Naukri, they go to Shadi.com for these things.
Yeah.
That's a chunk of revenue that's not coming back. Okay, so now you have to decide, okay, what am I going to do to replace that chunk of revenue? And it can't be more advertising.
But Madhu, like a lot of the print guys, that's why I think are experimenting with events in a big way. And a lot of the online guys, even when you look at like the online platforms, they are also struggling when it comes to ad-based monetization, right? Facebook and Google are pretty much absorbing 60 to 70% of ad revenues, at least in the US, and I think also a growing share in India. And they are also kind of compelled to look at things like referral revenues, where you kind of recommend products and then make some sort of a cut on the transaction, or branded advertising. So the thing is that there are so many of these parallel levers which are being pulled. Me and Sharad, we often feel that it cannot be one or the either. It's going to be like a blended, diversified mix of revenue where, you might have a free ad-supported platform, but you also, have a more deeper dive subscription-based model. And then you can have something, more product-oriented in terms of information, which can be used for referral revenue. We see that more and more companies might actually go for this kind of a hybrid approach instead of, being a pure play like I am a Ken, I'm not going to take any ads ever.
Right. And that is the solution that would work also, right? Because customers in some ways will self-select into these groups.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And so for a marketer at least, you know your customer better. And you can target better based on those ads. Now, if you're not going to be on Facebook, that's fine, right? There are so many ways of engaging a customer right now that not engaging with you on one platform doesn't necessarily make me not reach you at all.
It's very interesting, like you said, as a marketer, because I sometimes wonder, there was an era when, maybe in our parents' generation, where people used to actually refer to names of publications that they read. They would actually say that, this is what's mentioned in the Hindu, or, this particular paper is anti-establishment, so they have this view, this is left of center. Like the publication itself had some sort of a visibility to the end user, but with, increasing platformization or whatever, that word may be, the platform is taking the place of a publisher. So from a marketing standpoint, like you mentioned that's also a big challenge to reach the end user and be like, okay, I'm in Economic Times or I'm a Hindustan Times or I'm a Transfin. How do you kind of, bridge that gap?
This is a very nice question, right? So what is the role of these platforms? If you think about a conventional setup, right, these days platforms are generally intermediaries, right? They are helping you, a consumer who wants to absorb this content, to the newspaper which has the content, right? So that's essentially what, say, the Google News is doing, right? And there was actually a lot of pushback on their role somewhere, I think around in the 2010s or early 2000, somewhere around late 2000 and early 2010, by New York Times, Wall Street Journal, on how Google News is basically taking away their content for free, right? And they're losing their identity. And so Wall Street Journal at one time would not allow any clicks from Google News to be honored. So you would not get any articles from Wall Street Journal based on that.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas New York Times was some kind of a mixed thing, like they would allow one or two articles, but then you would have to pay. And so what has happened is there's a very nice study which looked at the impact of Google News as an intermediary. And so they used essentially, there was in Europe there was some cutoff where Google News was not available, so it was banned for some time. And so they used that as a period to check out what was the impact of the intermediary on your channel, right? Because it could also be bringing in new customers, right? And who have not seen your news, and so it can improve revenue that way. And that was basically what Google News was arguing. And the other thing is, these customers could have come to you anyway, and you're just letting them go somewhere else. And what they found was interesting is that the effect of Google News was positive,
right?
But it varied, right? There's always a varied thing in throwing away. And the small guys definitely benefited from the Google News, but those were not as frequent. So a lot of that actually, you would still go to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, and
So is it like that because smaller guys need distribution, Google News provides them with a base, which say a Wall Street Journal or New York Times doesn't need on day one. So for them, Google News is a negative because for them, it then kind of leads to a long-term pricing pressure.
Right. But again, I think you could evolve with that, right? So you can find out some nuances in how that works and then figure out how you can make it work for you. So the Wall Street Journal, by the way, after that changed their policies, right? So because as consumer preferences change and more people will start going to Google News first before coming to the Wall Street Journal, right?
Right.
They decided that you were getting more new customers. This was at one point in time. But as consumer preferences keep changing, you have to evolve and adapt. And so that's what is happening now. I don't think you lose identity as such, right? If you have value as a product, I think you will still figure out how to get that value across. Consumers will realize that. You have to adapt your business model though. That's a different thing.
Yeah, it's in fact during this COVID-19, I think government of Australia actually mandated Facebook and Google to share their advertising revenues with the publishers. So that was pretty interesting because I mean advertising is seeing a massive decline because of COVID, but I had not seen at a national level, right? Facebook and Google being asked to share advertising revenue with the respective publishers. So I mean, do you foresee like more such trends where there's more regulation as such coming from these distributors, quote unquote?
So it's difficult, right? So regulations, I think. Sometimes are useful in terms of market failures, but a lot of times they may not be very useful. And it should, you should think about what you're trying to solve through your regulation. Right? If it's a short-term problem, then regulations are not the best way to do it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, but if it's a long-term issue and things which are related to investments, for example, then you should definitely pass regulations which aid those.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I guess, for, like, as Nikhil was also saying, like, for publishers, I mean, creating quality content is partly a function of the investment that goes in as well, right? I mean, in terms of time and resources. So it becomes even more important to build a robust pricing and monetization model around it. And have you seen any interesting pricing and monetization models in the Indian or the US or any global footprint, which you think is doing some interesting work on that front? Because media is very challenging, right? I mean, revenues typically are back end loaded, so it becomes a little tricky. Are there any interesting models that you have seen or?
So the New York Times is actually one of those successful ones, right?
Okay, yeah.
It took them a while. They went through a phase where they were not doing as well, where they just decided to go with they removed advertisements and they just went for a pricing plan.
Right.
And paywall and all that. It was not very well done. But I think they realized how much they should price at. Because remember, we were talking about these lost revenues due to classifieds.
Yeah.
They were just not accounting for that lost revenue initially. And so the next time when they came out, they realized that is where you need to price more. You are going to lose some customers. Yeah. But unless you price more, there is no way you are going to survive. Right? So that was one. And the other thing I think the New York Times did, and this is from a monetization perspective, is to provide more value from an online content perspective. Right? So they don't think of their online as just whatever is there in print will be on online. They think of that as a separate product by itself, right? And the investments they've done in their online space is really nice. I like to go to New York Times just to see the kind of graphs they come up with. They're so beautiful.
Okay, yeah.
Right? And so they've really put in a lot of investments. They tried to figure out what is the ratio of advertising, print content you would see on online. And just because I'm online doesn't mean I'm okay with a ton of ads. There are like some newspaper sites in India, right? And I won't name them. But you go to their site and it's chock-a-block full of ads. You can hardly see the content. Yeah. Right? And then in between you get these subscription links which says, media is costly, please subscribe and pay for content. And I'm like, fine, I'm ready to pay for content, but you have to show me what I'm going to get.
I mean, it's interesting because, in India, I think the core priority, from a monetization perspective, is still print. So a lot of the papers they typically look at online as a kind of a second class product. I mean, the fact remains that, for example, a few of the biggest guys, they would often have something in print first, and then they would delay publication on their online edition, which is very counterintuitive to what's happening in the rest of the world. I guess the typical user profile is not there yet. Maybe it's a function of that, but it's interesting. But I mean, Madhu, there's one thing that I wanted to ask you. You said that New York Times obviously invested a lot when it came to their online proposition, but it's still at the end of the day, it's a text-based, majority text-based type of content. And on the other end, you look at companies like the Vox, which again have slick products, when it comes to videos, when it comes to more multimedia style formats, but they are facing the pressure because I guess those product classes themselves are much more capital intensive versus pure text-based content. So, I mean, do you see text-based content to play a key role or to continue playing a key role even in the online domain going forward?
So, I don't necessarily think of it as text versus video. You're right in the fact that the video and everything else is more costly, but that's like a one-time investment that you've done, right? So the cost of delivery is of course there, but over time that cost of delivery should be going down. But I think it is essentially the quality of content and how regularly you can keep it up, right? Now, what's by it, I think will be profitable if it survives a few more years.
Right.
A lot of it is also getting the name out, getting this brand reputation out. Vox is super popular with millennials and our generation kind of people, but we need more of us, right?
Correct. Absolutely, I love the product. I mean, yeah.
So it could be just a survival thing, whereas the New York Times has a reputation. They already had a base with which they could play along with, right? So there's a set of loyalists who would not give up on New York Times. And it's good to play with it. Vox is new. It is setting up that base.
Interesting.
Yeah. And, if this is on the sort of print side, and, what about scripted drama or scripted content as such? And that is another area which has seen massive investments, right? I mean, Netflix alone is probably going to do 17 to 20 billion next year. And you have an extremely competitive landscape now coming up with Netflix and Amazon, even in the Indian circuit, right? Netflix and Amazon Prime Video and HBO and whatnot and Voot. And there's so many, I think there are close to 20 OTT providers in India. And that's again a very investment heavy area. What are your views on that? And, it was interesting, Nikhil and I were chatting the other day about this press release by Inox where they sort of went into, showing their disappointment in some of the production houses going directly to an Amazon Prime Video. That's again an interesting area, right? Where, you use the word middlemen and distributors sort of in that context. Theaters are also somewhere within that value chain in the middle. How do you say that? They are distributors, right? Correct. So it's interesting that you bring this out. I was talking about this to a few of my colleagues here too. So first thing, right? So one is, the entry of OTT providers and investing in content is great for the content producers, right? Yeah. There's basically more money going around for people who are these creative arts. Correct. So it's great for them. The second thing is, it is a very risky business. True. Right? And, there is part of the reason why there's been a lot of growth in this area is because of the syndication of these units, right? Correct. Before there would be just one or two producers who would be willing to take the risk. Whereas now you see, any movie start, you see at least 15 to 20 people out there who are all exec producers or people who are part of that group, right? Yeah. And so anytime you diversify the risk, is always good, right? So each movie that you make or each content you make is highly risky. And so having so many people spreading the risk is a good thing. Yeah. Now, with OTT guys investing in it, right, it is not very clear how they are distributing the risk. Right? So, you can take, I think Netflix and Amazon have been bought. Yeah. Right? So this is very similar to investing in startups, right? If you have the money, you invest in startups like you invest in 10 or 100, and then maybe one is the thing that really pans out. Yeah. Now, the OTT guys should ask about, how much revenue do they expect to get from that one super hit? That's a tough one, right, to actually calculate that. Right, and that's why I think it may not pan out in the long run. This might be more like
setting up of bargaining positions, right?
Yeah.
And so going back to the Inox thing, right?
Yeah.
This is very standard in almost all kinds of distribution channels, by the way. So usually you will have a dominant distributor, something like theaters, and another distributor, an online provider, let's say like an Amazon, right? And the dominant distributor will always complain.
Yeah. True.
Okay, and the reason for the complaint is in some ways valid. Okay, so here is the way to think about it. So if you think about the value provided, right, to the consumer, I think I am very right. So there is a consumption experience. So you can watch it either in theaters or you can watch it at home. Again, different people will have different consumption experiences, right? So married couples might want to take a break from Netflix or may want to go to the theater. Like a dinner and a movie is a thing, right? For a lot of people, at least till their 40s, 50s, and going by ads nowadays, even for the older population. Okay? So you might want to go to the theaters for the dinner and the consumption, right? The other part is convenience. Okay? Watching movies at home is convenient, right? There is just almost no travel cost, there's no cost of finding the right thing, interacting with people that you don't want to meet, things like that.
Yeah.
Right? So convenience aspect, OTT guys Now there's a third part to it, which is where I think is important, is demand enhancing activities. Okay? So a lot of times what happens is there is one distributor who puts in a lot of effort in helping the product sell. Okay?
Correct.
So movie theaters, a lot of times box office revenues from movies for other things. Right? And the distributors are complaining because they have invested in these things, assuming that you are going to take care of it. So this is a standard commitment issues in contract, right? You want the downstream person, in this case a theater, to invest in value enhancing service, making good theaters, making the consumption experience great.
Yeah, IMAX 3D, 4D and all that premium formats, I guess, right?
Exactly. So you do all of that, but once they invest, if you don't give them enough commitments for that investment, you can always be opportunistic and say, okay, now that you have done it, you are now at my beck and call. I can screw you over and not basically show you any movie. So what will you do now? Right? Your investments, you're on the hold for your investment and you're stuck. So a lot of times what people do in these situations is to basically guarantee something for the downstream, which in this case should be theaters. Right? So theaters should be protected in some ways. And
but I mean,
so normally what they do is something called block book. Okay? So here's the thing, right? So key thing in contracting is it is not useful to think about short-term solutions. You cannot be transactional in these cases because you want people to invest for the long term. If you're going to be short-term transactional, these markets will collapse.
I mean, it's very interesting when you're looking at things like theatrical windows. I mean, I remember there was a time when most amount of narration on outside the entertainment ecosystem, even when you used to look at general broader entertainment style content, there was a time when it was like, okay, online is going to be the next thing. Then suddenly a lot of guys came up with online to offline hybrid mix, because at the end of the day, like, there's an experience which also counts for something, right? I mean, people go to the theater for a particular reason. They go to the theater to get that entire immersive experience. The theater obviously has better infrastructure than they would have in their homes. The way the IMAX format came out. So I'm guessing theaters in India will also probably start getting more and more innovative, as Madhu, you're saying. But let's take a step back, and we were talking about OTT platforms. So if you look at, like, say, a Netflix, right? Now Netflix has been, obviously it has deep pockets, but it has been free cash flow negative, right? Their strategy, it seems to be that let's do great content, let's have very customized distribution, and we charge a premium, right? And their expectation is that a lot of people are going to cut the cord and make Netflix as some sort of a de facto cable option, which is happening to a large extent in the US. On the other end, you have Amazon Prime, which are slightly lower priced, but they have reasonably solid, pipeline of content. And they seem to be using Amazon Prime more as a customer acquisition tool for Amazon, the marketplace, right? And both Netflix and Amazon are obviously investing more and more in original programming. And then on the third end, you have someone like a Hotstar, who's focusing purely on, or mostly on ad-supported content, looking at sports windows, live sport events. So, you have three clearly different strategies. One is premium, great distribution, great content. Second is mid-tier pricing, but complement with an existing platform. And third being purely ad-supported, dependent on live sports. Do you see anyone as a winner or a loser here in the long term?
So, that's a good question. It's tough to say. I can see all three of them coexisting actually, because all of them are bringing three different value propositions, right? So Amazon Prime, for example, is all about cross-subsidization, right? The Prime Video is just part of a huge glut of different things that the Amazon Prime brings to you.
Yeah.
And so they are working on these negative externalities that exist. Like you may not be a video watcher, but you like home delivery.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that will subsidize some of their costs. So that is their value proposition. So it is not just movies, but everything else. Netflix is all about content, right? And the interesting thing to ask ourselves is on Amazon or at Netflix, right? How many of those movies would you watch in a theater? Mm-hmm. Or how many movies would you pay and watch?
Right.
Yeah.
Right, so it goes back to our risky argument, right? Like in Netflix, there's a lot of content, there's a lot of niche content, but I don't think I would watch in a theater. I would pay and go to a theater to watch a lot of those movies.
Yeah, and that is evident in the numbers as well, right? Like at least in the West, footfall has been declining year to year. Revenues have been going up for exhibitors, but footfall has been declining. I mean, there's no clear evidence that pricing is what is driving the overall revenue. And the reason you can drive those pricing is through upgrading infrastructure and charging a premium on IMAX 3D, 4D, and just visual. That's the only way to justify price uptick, right? I mean, that for me, what do you think about that? Like in the long run, how sustainable that can be when you rely so much on price upticks for revenue growth?
So I think there are different things, right? So I think, by the way, price upticks cannot happen just as is, right? They can only happen if you are able to provide the value for the price uptick, right?
Yeah.
Or unless you have inelastic customers who are basically will pay you whatever it is as long as it is, like Apple customers, for example, right?
Yeah.
Highly inelastic, and they will pay you whatever premium Apple charges.
Yeah.
But so the price uptick you cannot just keep increasing. Like that can never be.
Correct.
But if you think about what is happening in the US, right, and the theater market is diminishing there, I think again it's a consumer trend story and not necessarily a theater story.
Mm-hmm.
Remember we were talking about a movie and a dinner concept, right?
Yeah.
That is fading now in the US.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? For most of the people who are, roughly around our age and below, to them, it is not about dinner and a movie. A date night does not necessarily have to include a movie in that. There's still people who do that, but I think that those numbers have fallen a lot.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Whereas in India, I think that's not true. In India, the consumption experience is still very much, a dinner and a movie. That is still what people in India think of as a date.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And, when you talk about price increases and volumes and sort of dinner and date concept, and one thing that sort of justifies is the existence of a theatrical window, right? I mean, if there's a new movie that I want to watch, there is no other option but to watch it in a theater. The moment that competitive advantage sort of diminishes, which might, I mean, you're seeing a decline in theatrical windows. The moment that declines, the justification for that price point also sort of should diminish, right?
Yes and no, right? So again, this uncertainty we are talking about, right?
Yeah.
So there are two people here, right? So the theater owners want to remove movies that are not running and put a new one instead, right? Whereas the content providers basically have put in the money. They want it to run even more.
Yeah.
And the reverse end, you have these blockbuster movies which the theater guys want to keep running, but the movie content provider wants to now increase and strike when the iron is hot kind of a thing, right? So they want to expand their sources of revenue. So there are these trade-offs that are always there, and so it is difficult to cling on to one aspect of it.
Yeah. And in this entire value chain, how important do you think are role of analytics, right? I mean, especially for guys like OTT platforms who have much more data points on their consumer rather than a theater or a producer or a distributor as such. But these OTT platforms are directly interfacing with the direct viewer on multiple fronts, right? Do you think that is also another key? I remember I once read a transcript of Ted Sarandos, who's the chief content head of Netflix, and he said that the biggest problem that he has right now is figuring out what a consumer should see on the front home screen, and it should be different for everyone. But what is that? Have that window where I can show my consumer what he or she would like. For me, the biggest challenge is to crack that. And they're increasingly behaving like tech data-centric platforms, right?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. Okay, so remember we were talking about these three things, right? Convenience, consumption experience, and demand-enhancing activities, right? I think what Netflix and Amazon do very well, okay, is so Amazon is very good at promoting online, okay, and Netflix is also doing the promotion along. And Netflix and Amazon are really good at identifying these consumer trends, okay. So the demand enhancing, the signal value that theatrical releases had, if that is being taken over by Netflix and Amazon, right? If that value proposition is being lost, okay, then you're going to see more and more shift to OTT. So I think the worry is not the consumption experience. It's not the convenience. These are all things that we already know there are.
Yeah.
The worry is, the value proposition in terms of this demand-enhancing activities that these data owners did, right? If they are not able to give that signal to the content providers, then the content providers will obviously move on to the others who can. I think that's the worry, not the short-term part. Like, I think the INOX thing was justified in complaining about it, but I don't think COVID is going to do anything. It's an outlier, right?
Yeah.
We have no idea about how behavior is going to change.
But I think probably guys like Inox are worried about. I mean, there was obviously, there was an era of, I would say, high margin business which Indian exhibitors or theaters have enjoyed, right? Because I guess that entire consumer behavior trend is probably 20 years behind what you have in the US, right? But now with COVID, that entire trend of moving from exhibition style content to actually sitting in your home and watching it on a screen, that entire thing probably seems to get accelerated, right? If suppose say tomorrow there's some 3 or 4 months down the line, there is some permanent rule regarding social distancing requirements within theaters. I guess that's what someone like Inox is worried about. So that means that
I think that again is short term, right? So they will have to readjust their costs, okay, and they will get it. Like if you give them some certainty in how the world is going to look like, I think industries will adapt.
So do you think that they'll probably have to be more creative about marketing themselves as well, in the sense that
not themselves as well. I think that will not be an issue. I think predicting movie successes, right? So theaters used to be a good indicator of movie successes. So, if I know that it has run for a day in certain theaters, it used to tell the movie producers that it would be a hit. Okay? So they would get some idea about what the demand is. And movie theaters would do their own part in success, building up the demand for a particular movie. Now, if that role, right, is taken over by the OTT guys, who are pretty good at figuring out demand right now, right, promoting things. If that role is taken over, then it just becomes a question of consumption experience and convenience, those trade-offs. You lose an extra edge in whatever you have. So bottom line is, I think what movie producers or what theater owners have to do is to get better at analytics. They have to start figuring out how to, figure out which movie is going to be more successful. They have to build in contracts or safeguards which are already there, but I think they should strengthen it in terms of not moving. And the third part, unfortunately, I'm sure is there is going to be more consolidation. So consolidation in the sense that I think you're going to see more bigger entities like PVRs and INOXs being formed. Okay? The small guys cannot stand up to this onslaught unless you're a niche player showing niche movies.
And probably some more push towards experiential products, right? Which will be their strength at the end of the day. The kind of a parallel which you see like the Marvel universe, that kind of, all the superhero movies which came for almost close to a decade now, which pretty much rely on the theater experience. So there was obviously a push from the exhibitors as well to actually go for that format.
Yeah, definitely.
So lots of 3D Bollywood movies. Is that the future?
That would be interesting. I would imagine scenarios where I am running around the trees dancing with the heroine, I guess.
Yeah. I don't know, it's a geeky thing to say, but probably 3D makes everything better, right?
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does. There you go.
Virtual reality makes it even better.
Absolutely. But obviously, we have to talk a bit about COVID, Madhu, in the sense that there was a time when, tech companies in general. Now, when I'm saying tech companies, I'm also including, OTT guys, I'm including everyone from that consumer tech universe. I think wasn't it only like a year or two back where there was intense regulatory pressure on most big tech guys, and suddenly with COVID, that regulatory pressure is off because there's this clear utility which is being offered by big tech players. What are your thoughts on that?
So when you're talking tech, are you talking in terms of advertising tech?
I'm talking about the big tech, the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, where there was a lot of regulatory scrutiny when it comes to data privacy, when it comes to, competition. Like Elizabeth Warren in US has been talking about breaking up big tech for quite some time. That was part of her presidential push. But now with COVID, that sentiment seems to have loosened a bit. Do you see that as a temporary blip, and you see that after like some normalization comes, big tech will again start feeling some sort of a pressure? Or do you think that there's a kind of permanent realization? I mean, this is obviously a kind of a big unknown at this stage, but just want to hear your thoughts on it.
So you're right that big tech has been facing pressure, right? For different reasons. So it is becoming almost like gargantuan, like how Microsoft used to be at one point, right? So the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Googles are facing pressure because they are now in all aspects of their life. That is one thing. The second part is on the kind of data they are collecting and for what purpose, right? And so those would be the data privacy laws. So GDPR, which was passed in Europe, was the earliest act. And then you have the California Consumer Protection Act, which got implemented at the beginning of this year.
Right.
And then India is also having a National Data Privacy Act, which I don't think has been passed yet. Yeah, I think it has been tabled but not passed. And all of these acts, they try to get to consumer privacy, right? And I think, so just to highlight what the acts do, and then I will tell you a little bit about the impact on big tech as such. So what the acts try to do is, at least the GDPR and everything else is more or less similar with different variations based on the country.
Mm-hmm.
So first one is clearly the data minimization. Okay, so what that means is that firms will only collect data that they use it for. So for example, if I have to fill in my billing address to pay a bill, I cannot store the data for any other reason. So I cannot use his location to infer the distance and figure out what all he bought because of that. Okay, so if billing address is captured, it's captured only for billing and you should not use it for anything else.
Right.
So there are data minimization laws. Then the other one is Consumer Privacy Act, which is more on the consent part of it, where it lets the consumer know what all has been collected and what for. Now the third part is liability, where what they've done is very interesting. From a legal perspective, shifted the liability onto to the firms. So before, the liability was on the consumer, saying if data was lost, it's your data, you should have kept it carefully.
Right.
But the law basically changes that and says if a firm collects data from if it's personal and private data, you are liable for the protection of it. Okay, and so that again increases the cost of collecting these data. And so that's essentially what it did. Okay. Now, after the implementation, how has it affected the big tech? So it actually shrunk the market a little bit, but I think it's more of a short-term blip. Everybody figures out how to navigate these regulations. But it has led to a shift in how the market has been structured. So big tech actually is gaining more market share in these setups. Okay, so the small guys are the ones who are being squeezed. And the way to think about this is, once you pass regulation, firms which are more capable or have the resources to develop these setups are the ones that firms and consumers will prefer. And big tech has those resources and capabilities, right?
Right.
And so you see a shift towards big tech.
Right.
So big tech is actually gaining from these setups, even though they are at the forefront. They are actually gaining from these things. There's a small guys who actually have to worry about how to proceed.
This is pretty much, Sharad, in line with what I think Anuj was also saying, right, a couple of weeks back, in terms of how big tech is basically going to get bigger.
Yeah. No, this might just be a perfect catalyst, right? And it accelerates the push towards tech also by a few years when such a thing happens. So I think so too. It's in line with what Anuj was saying, what we were discussing.
See, and the other thing that people talk about is privacy, right? It's very interesting. It's all framing effects, right? When you talk about is privacy important to you, everybody will say yes. Okay? But if you tell them, okay, can I collect something to provide you better products?
Yeah.
Okay? So then people are like, oh, yes, I want better targeting, better advertising. Please use my information. I'm anyway giving it to you, right? So then there is some trust that you have to develop and say that, I'm not going to lose this data. But these are, I think, not really that big an issue when it comes to normal brands. Of course, you can always misuse the data, right? If it falls into the wrong hands, that can be misused, and that is a concern.
Yeah, and I totally agree. Like people often don't create clear lines between use of data and misuse of data, and like justifying something on a misuse of an aspect does not make the entire aspect wrong, right? So I also think that there's a balance in everything, and like there are more positives to actual data analysis and targeting, which sometimes can be misused, and that is a threat, but it cannot be the sole reason to avoid the concept altogether.
Right. So here's the funny thing, right? So one of the big news in the tech domain is how Google is going to stop the use of cookies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, who do you think has the best non-cookie ID out there? Is it Heck, they are a big search engine with just bad cookies, right?
Google, yeah.
So Google is basically not acting better with, right? They know it is stacked in their favor.
Yeah.
And by banning cookies right now, they're just saying, okay, we are in line with what policymakers are doing. But in reality, they stand to benefit a lot.
Fascinating. Yeah.
It's a big scam, isn't it? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, this has been super interesting, Madhu. We have almost touched 1 hour. How about that? And I think this has been a fantastic chat. We pretty much started with, I think, news content, and we switched gears to OTT, and I guess big tech and the regulatory push, regulatory pressure, which is now getting transformed into some sort of a macro tailwind, which is going to make them bigger. So it's, I think, a great theme to end this podcast. And it's been great having you, Madhu. It's great to have you, and very happy that you could find some of your time to chat about these things.
Yeah. It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to have marketing and strategy sort of folks who think analytically. So thank you so much for your time again.
Thanks, guys. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. No, thanks a lot. And I think on that note, Sharath, we'll be back soon, I'm sure, with another exciting guest. And obviously, we have just gone through 5 days of extensive presentations by the finance minister on the latest economic stimulus, and a lot of commentary has gone on that. I don't know next time we talk what has transpired. So the world is changing on a daily basis, but it's always good to keep track of things and get interesting people to comment on it. Why not? So with that, this is Nikhil Arora, and I have with me Sharath Tupran signing off.